So I want to show you this video from Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, and where she goes into some detail about the lockdown procedure and how Scotland is going to exit that through a transition period. Now, she also talks about a document that is available for the Scottish people to read. I'm going to look at some of that document, the PDF. I'll link it in the description, of course. So let's see what she has to say first.
Ahead of us, of all of us, are really complex. We will, as we have done all along, seek to inform those decisions with the best scientific advice possible. But the science will never be exact, so we will also require to make very careful judgments. And we are in uncharted territory. It's impossible to know with absolute certainty what the impact of our decisions will be in advance. That means we must also be prepared to adapt and change course as we go. We want to ease restrictions, of course we do, but we cannot absolutely rule out having to reapply some of them in future should we have evidence that the virus is again running out of control. In the days and the weeks ahead, evidence, data and modelling will allow us to take firmer decisions. As that happens, this paper will evolve into a detailed plan with metrics, actions, milestones and measurements attached to it. And I give an assurance today that as we go through this process, we will share our thinking on an ongoing iterative basis. But the lockdown measures we are taking to contain the virus are also doing damage. They're doing harm to the economy and to living standards, to children's education, to other aspects of our physical health and to mental health and well-being. And the toll of all of that may also, in time, be measured in poorer health outcomes and lives lost. So we must try to find a better balance than the one we have right now. But my second point is that as we do so, we cannot and we must not take our eye off the need to suppress the virus and minimise the damage that it does. What we will be seeking to do is find a new normal, a way of living alongside this virus, but in a form that keeps it under control and stops it taking the toll that we know it can do. Social distancing and limiting our contacts with others will be a fact of life for a long time to come, certainly until treatments and ultimately a vaccine offer different solutions. So that means possibly for the rest of this year and maybe even beyond. And that's why talk of lifting the lockdown as if it's a flick of a switch moment is misguided. Our steps, when we take them, will need to be careful, gradual, incremental, and probably quite small to start with. We will need to assess them in advance and monitor them in action. Sometimes, as I said a moment ago, we may even need to reverse things.
Okay, so I think that's quite an interesting take she has. It's somewhat, of course, of a contrast to Boris Johnson and his administration, and in particular Boris Johnson, in how he regarded this virus at the beginning and how to deal with it by taking it on the chin. So you can see how someone extremely professional, someone who's dealing with this in a professional manner, is somewhat different to the likes of Boris Johnson. Now, she referred to this document that I'm going to show you here. Let me just open it up. So it's this is a document that has been released by the Scottish Government about the transition period out of the lockdown. So it's divided up into a number of sections here, but I'm more interested in section 3 and section 7. So I'm just going to read a little bit from those. So the Section 3 talks about the preparing for the transition. So Scotland has to prepare to exit from the lockdown. So of course Scotland is under lockdown at the moment, and as she has explained in the video, it's causing a huge amount of damage to the economy, to public health, to mental health as well, and it's important that there is some sort of transition out of that lockdown. So first of all, they say here we must suppress transition of the virus, or less than 1. So what this or less than 1 means is, at the moment, depending on the location you are, if you're infected, you can infect up to 3 people. So that means that one individual who's infected infects on average, without any type of social distancing in place or masks or gloves, about 3 or maybe even 4 people. So just think about that for a moment. One person infects 3 people. Those 3 people, they will infect another 3 people. Those 3 people will infect another 3, and then and so on and so forth. And in a short period of time, the virus is able to spread very, very far. And then, of course, if we live in a globalized world, it makes it much easier for the virus to travel around the planet. So the goal of the Scottish Government is to reduce the transmission rate, or reproductive rate, to less than 1 person. So 1 person will transmit it to less than 1 other person. What that means basically is that on average, it will be a lower rate than what's currently at the current rate is. We must continue to adhere to the advice: stay at home if symptomatic, keep physical distancing, and maintain good hand hygiene and cough hygiene. So I'm not sure what she means here by cough hygiene. I assume it's mask wearing. And mask wearing, of course, is an issue because we need distribution of these masks. And there are different types of masks. So, for example, the surgical mask is one that protects it protects you from transmitting the virus to someone else. So if you're infected, you don't infect others. But there are other types of masks. I think it's the FFP3 mask. Or correct me in the comment section, of course. But there is another type of mask that actually protects you from getting infected. Which are these types of masks are much more expensive to make and to buy, of course. So they are in short supply. So it doesn't say here what type of cough hygiene, but of course the basic cough hygiene is to cough into your sleeve, and or to wear also long sleeves so that you can wash your clothes after that. We must develop public health capability to deal with cases and outbreaks in a way that prevents widespread community transmission. So of course this is continued funding and support for example, the NHS in Scotland. Now, one of the graphs here I want to show you also is interesting, related to the impact the lockdown has had in Scotland. So I don't know if you can see this, but it says here lockdown. So numbers were somewhat declining because of the social distancing that was imposed by the Scottish Government before the lockdown. So it was already having an impact. But subsequent to that, we can see how the lockdown has dramatically decreased the doubling rate. So the doubling rate is how often the infected double in number, and you can see a huge decline here. So that was quite interesting, and of course it shows that the lockdown is working extremely well. Now, the other section I want to show you is section number 7. So it talks, which is interesting here, it's talking about adjusting to a new normal and living with the virus. So this is, as I said before, is a contrast to what Boris Johnson was talking about before he went into hospital. Of course, he was talking about how to defeat the virus. We're going to defeat the virus. Things are going to go back to normal, and we're going to get on with our lives. The Scottish approach, of course, is much more pragmatic and understands that the virus cannot be defeated until we have a vaccine or until we have some type of medication that can deal with it. But at the moment, we don't have that. So we need to implement a balance between supporting the economy, but also defeating the virus the best we can. So it goes on to say here, we will build Scotland's economy, overcoming inequality and advancing human well-being. So this is interesting because what they're talking about here is that we're going to rebuild the economy after the lockdown, but we're not going to ignore our policies, our social policies, our progressive policies that we've been implementing over the last number of years. So Scotland is not going to just focus only on the economy. And this is a contrast to what's happening in London, of course, with the Tories. The Tories are talking about economy. We're going to fix the economy. We're going to save the economy, somewhat at the expense of everything else. So the next point here is we will work with Scotland's communities to build cohesion and mutual support. So this is a sort of a given. And we will work, the third point, we will work with and learn from governments around the world as we learn to live with the virus. So this is, once again, a contrast with London. It's a contrast with the Brexiteer mentality. If we look back at how the government in London has been dealing with this virus since the beginning, we don't need to listen to the experts living abroad. We don't need to listen to the WHO. We know what we're doing. We don't need the EU. We don't need the EU's support. We don't need to be part of an EU procurement scheme. We can do it ourselves. We don't need to listen to anyone else. We have the best people working on this problem. And of course, the UK approach was something of an outlier. It was something of an exception in Europe and also in the world. The idea of resorting to herd immunity was it was not the only country dealing with it, but it was one of the few countries that was deciding to go down that route. And Scotland is talking about, no, we're going to listen to other governments. I think it's very important that we look at the countries that are, who are working well, who are defeating this virus, who are overcoming it. And in Europe, we have Germany, who's doing reasonably well. But the best example is South Korea. And South Korea has dealt with these problems before. They have learned from that, and they have been probably the most, if not one of the most, if not the most successful in dealing with this current crisis. How did they succeed? By a simple formula: test and trace. So they're testing as many people as possible, finding people who are infected. Maybe they're asymptomatic, of course, but if they are infected, isolating them, and then tracing the people they had contact with, testing those people and tracing the infected from that group, and then testing and tracing, and then making testing as easy as possible. I've seen pictures of old style telephone booths that were testing people on a continuous basis, and not just testing once, but continuous testing. Because you have to remember, someone may test negative, but after a week they could get infected, and if they're not being tested on a continuous basis, you're going to miss some infections. So I do recommend you check out this document. I'll leave a link in the description. Let me know your comments. Always much appreciated. Thanks.